Hey everyone, today we are making scones, perfect fluffy scones. Now, traditionally they're made with butter, but these are made with a surprising ingredient that initially I wouldn't have thought would work, but they're made with olive oil. I mean, I was really surprised that it would work so well. These are so delicious, they're light, really easy to whip up quite quickly. Finish with some rich vanilla cream or some whipping cream and some jam, my favorite being Little Scarlet from Tiptree. For my fruit scone variation, I'm going to soak my sultanas or raisins in Earl Grey tea. So I boiled some water and I'm adding some Harrods Earl Grey tea, number 42 blend, and I'm going to let that steep for 4 minutes. You can infuse your sultanas with any flavored tea or water that you like. I like plumping them before using them because this just produces a scone with juicy fruit rather than like these dry little pieces. So I'm just removing the tea bag and pouring the tea over the sultanas. So you want just enough tea or hot water to cover the sultanas so they plump up and become nice and juicy. Set that aside to cool fully. You want them in there for at least half an hour, but feel free to do that step the night before or 2 nights before and just leave them in the fridge. For our scone dough, we're going to add the flour, baking powder, salt, and we're just going to whisk those to combine. I don't like whisking flour. I don't think you necessarily need to, especially not for doughs, but I think it's good to whisk them to make sure that your baking powder or salt and whatever you're adding to it, spices, are evenly distributed, and this does break down any lumps. I think if you have to sift flour because you've got hard lumps in it, you have a bigger problem and you probably shouldn't be using that flour. Then in another bowl, we're adding the olive oil, sugar, vinegar, and some lovely plant-based milk. I always like using soy. And we just want to whisk these together, and they're actually going to come together really nicely. Something about adding sugar to a mixture of oil and water makes them combine. So we just want to whisk them until they're combined and there's no separation of oil or milk. So then we can add our mixture, the oil mixture, to our flour and just combine everything. We want to just mix this until it comes together, all the dry ingredients have been incorporated and a dough forms. And once it starts to come together, you can just turn it out onto the bench where we can finish kneading it a bit more. So I've made thousands of scones in my lifetime, and thousands, that's right. Made them almost every day for 3 years. We mix it until a dough actually forms. I want it to just come together, a smooth top. Today, because I'm making fruit and plain scones, I'm just going to cut my dough in half, keep one side for the plain scones and one side to mix with the raisins. And we're just going to cover that with some cling wrap or a moist tea towel just to make sure they don't dry out. So our sultanas are nice and plump, we just need to strain them before we use them. You can see they've really absorbed a lot of the water, and when you squeeze one they're nice and squishy. So just straining out that tea, just going to let them dry out a little bit. Going to take the portion of the dough that I'm adding the sultanas to, and I'm just going to add those to the dough. I like to have as much fruit as I can in a fruit scone. And I'm just going to gently knead this and kind of press that fruit in. And I'll just set it aside, wrapped in some cling film, to rest for about 10 or 15 minutes. So our classic dough is nice and rested. You can see that it's expanded a bit. So I'm just going to keep the fruit one wrapped. Start by just lightly dusting the bench. And then a little tiny bit of flour on top. And we're going to roll it out to about 3 centimeters thick. What you'll find is that when you make scones, if they're too tall, they will kind of spring open quite tall and then maybe topple over. So you want to kind of get the right thickness. We take a 6 centimeter or 2.5 inch cutter, and this is where a bit of flour, dusting the top with a bit of flour, is really helpful because it lets the scone cut really cleanly and then release nice and easily. For the tray, we don't need to line it with paper, although you can. I'm just going to dust it very lightly with flour. So just with a very decisive motion, I'm cutting all the way through. One thing I should mention is that you want the nicest side to be on the bottom, because that is the side that's going to be on top. We just want to use a decisive motion and cut through the scone and then turn it around. We now have that nice sharp edge on top. We can re-roll the dough by just pressing it gently back into shape. I would recommend letting this portion of the dough rest for another 10 minutes just until it's really relaxed. It's important to cross pin, so we roll in 2 directions. This way the scone comes out nice and round and doesn't pull into an oval or a oblong shape. So I'm just going to let that rest. For our fruit scone dough, we do the same thing. And then again, I'm just going to press the dough together into kind of a nice round flat shape and then let it rest for about 10 or 15 minutes. We want that dough to relax again before we cut it. I'm going to just pat this into shape and cut the last 2 scones. Once you've cut your scones, you do want to rest them for another 20 minutes. I know it feels like a long time, but it does result in a much fluffier scone. So now is the time to preheat the oven, and 20 minutes will bake these. I just recommend keeping them loosely covered with some cling wrap just so they don't dry out, or a damp tea towel, it's up to you. I'm going to dust the tops with just a tiny bit of plain flour, it's just for presentation. The oven's preheated, these have rested for 20 or 30 minutes and they're going in the oven. So, whether you like jam or cream first, I don't think it really matters. I'm using my fresh whipping cream and some Little Scarlet strawberry jam, which is also James Bond's favorite, by the way. So again, doesn't matter whether you are doing jam or cream, but please split your scone. I'll do one with jam and one with cream first and one with jam first, just to keep people happy. But I think whatever you do, please do not sandwich your scones. I think that's a crime. This is so good. There's something so delightful about this combination. On its own, I couldn't really care too much for a scone, but with jam and cream, it's just something else. Thank you.